Alright, video number 2 for senses. We're going to talk about our last two special sense organs, the eyes and the ears. I kept these separate because they're quite a bit more complicated than the other sense organs, and I wanted to make sure we had time to really go through it. So first, a recap. How do sense organs work? They take a stimulus, which could be physical, chemical, temperature, or light, and then using specialized cells, convert it to electrical energy. From there, they send the information to a special nerve cell, which takes that information to the brain. So the eye is actually a pretty complicated organ. It converts light energy and turns it into an image our brain can see. It's kind of how this camera is taking my image, turning it into ones and zeros, sending it through the computer and then to your computer so that it can read it and then you guys can see my face. The first stop in the light getting to my brain is through the cornea. The cornea is a clear membrane that protects some of the important middle structures of the eye. It makes a pouch filled with this fluid called the aqueous humor, and this fluid helps regulate the pressures that are in our eyes. Behind the cornea, we have the colored portion called the iris and the darker center called the pupil. The muscles of the iris help open and close the pupil, making it wider or narrower, and this allows light to get into the eye. Behind the pupil is a lens, which allows us to focus the image that we see into the nerves in the back of the eye, kind of like how a projector works. The lens changes shape, and this allows us to see objects that are farther or closer away. After the lens, we get to the main body of the eye, another fluid-filled sac that has 3 layers. The outer layer is called the sclera, which we would call the white portion of your eye. The middle is the choroid, and then we have the retina. So light comes in through the lens, travels through the body of the eye, which is filled with a fluid more like a jelly called the vitreous humor, all the way to a special spot of the retina called the macula. Any light that hits the macula will be what we see in our main vision, while any light in the rest of the retina makes up our peripheral vision. So let's take a detailed look at the retina. The retina is filled with photoreceptors that will convert light to electrical impulses. There are 2 different types of photoreceptors, the rods and the cones. The rods allow us to see in black and white and in dim light, so they're great for night vision, whereas the cones allow us to see color. Interesting fact on the night vision, so when we need to see in the dark, our pupils need to let in as much light as we can, so they open really, really wide. And when we want to see in the daylight or in bright light, our pupils close because we don't need as much light. So that's why if you shine a light in somebody's eyes, they get really blinded. It's because their pupils were the wrong size for that amount of light. It's also why if you walk in a dark room, it takes a few minutes for your eyes to adjust. That's your pupils adjusting and getting the right size. There's one area on the eye that has no rods or cones, and that's called the optic disc. That's actually the spot where the optic nerve connects to the eye. So this is a blind spot in our vision. Luckily, because we have 2 eyes, our brain can take the image from each eye and make up the difference, so we don't walk around having random blind spots. So from the retina, rods and cones turn the energy from the light and turn that to electrical stimuli. And then that stimulus is carried up the optic nerve and out to the brain. So one more time because the light's complicated. Right from the top, light hits the cornea, goes through the pupil, the lens, through the vitreous humor, to the retina, and then from there to the optic nerve. Alright folks, last organ is the ear. So the ear responds to physical stimuli, like vibrations. And in this case, the vibrations come from sound waves that are in the air. So the first step is for sound to get focused into the ear, which happens because of the folds in our external ears. From there, sound waves are focused through the ear canal to the tympanic membrane. On the way, ceruminous glands create wax, which helps protect the ear from dirt, debris, and disease. The tympanic membrane, or eardrum, is a thin, stretched membrane. Behind it are 3 small bones, the incus, malleus, and stapes. This area is called the middle ear. If you've ever seen a foot pedal on a drum kit, they kind of work like that. The idea is that the membrane will vibrate, which will cause these bones to vibrate as well. The malleus is like a little hammer, and its vibrations stimulate the oval window, which moves us to the inner ear. So the inner ear is this hardened structure. It's full of tubes, and all these tubes are full of fluids and inside they also have special cells. The fluid is really important. It's called perilymph, and it moves with the vibrations, but it also moves with the body. So the malleus stimulates the oval window, kind of like tapping on a drum or tapping on a window. It sends the vibrations inside the inner ear. The main part of the inner ear is called your vestibule, and off that, fluid runs to an area called the cochlea and 3 semicircular canals. Alright, so let's just recap really quickly because that was a lot of information. Sound hits the outer ear, focused in through the ear canal, where it hits the tympanic membrane. The vibrations cause the incus, malleus, and stapes to vibrate, and those vibrations stimulate the fluid in the vestibule. From there, those vibrations travel to the cochlea. Inside the cochlea, we have a special organ with little hairs called the organ of Corti, and when stimulated, it takes those vibrations, turns it into electrical energy, and sends it up to the vestibular cochlear nerve. Whew, that was a lot. All right, last thing about the ear. The vestibule is actually responsible for regulating our balance and our position in the world. So inside the vestibule are these organs called maculae, and these guys move and shift depending on where the fluid is in the ear, and this helps tell us which way is up or down. If I'm sitting up straight, the fluid should be level, but if I turn my head, the fluid will tilt to kind of line up with gravity. The maculae can read that, and they tell my brain if I'm straight up and down or if I'm turned to the side. The semicircular canals have a similar function, and they help us keep our balance when we're moving or spinning. So as we move around and that fluid shifts, the fluid will stimulate 2 different types of organs, capula and the crista ampullaris. And as we spin or as we move, these guys start to get displaced, and they tell the brain that we're in movement or we're not standing still. That's why we get really dizzy when we spin too much. These guys can't figure out if we're still moving or what's going on. Both the maculae and the crista ampullaris send all this information up to the vestibular nerve.